I think it's officially time for us to start. So I'm your moderator, Allison Wilkins, the Collections Digitization Coordinator for the Natural History Museum of Utah. Here to start the session on digitization coordination. Jill Goodwin is the moderator. And so we'll have plenty of time after the talks for discussion. And we'd love your input on a new group initiative that we will be launching about digitization coordination. So to kick us off, we'll have Ellie from the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew to talk about their work.
Hi, so I'm Ellie from Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and I'm going to be talking about coordinating the digitization of new acquisition specimens. So some background to begin with about Kew Herbarium. So it's one of the oldest and largest herbaria in the world. It houses over 7 million specimens, representing about 95% of vascular plant genera worldwide. It's an active herbarium with over 300 visitors per year, and it has specimens collected from 1696 through to present-day research trips, which are gathering and bringing back specimens as we speak. Currently, Kew is striving for museum and archive service accreditation for their collections, including these collections within the herbarium. So this scheme uses Spectrum, which is the UK Museum Collections Management Standard, as a benchmark for best practice. And it provides a framework for institutions so they can review their policies and practices, and it results in better management of the collections, increased efficiency across operations, and raises collections accessibility to the public. Ultimately, it aims to ensure that our collections are governed appropriately so they can be protected for the future. Simultaneous to this, we also are within the midst of a large-scale digitization project. So this began in March 2022 and runs through until March 2026. And the goal is to create an accessible online catalogue of our collections. So taking these two aspects into account, it's been necessary for Kew to review our standard procedures so we can ensure that the online catalogue that's created by the digitization project is maintained and managed responsibly according to those Spectrum standards for our museum accreditation. So one key aspect of this is looking at the digitization of all incoming specimens to our herbarium. So we currently receive about 15 to 20,000 new specimens annually, and these are from various sources such as from gifts from other institutions and also Kew collected material. And the majority of this material enters our herbarium unmounted. So here's a representation of the procedure prior to the work that I'm going to discuss. But you can see the material entered into the CMU, or the Collection Management Unit. I'll probably refer to it as the CMU throughout this talk. And they're the ones who manage the incoming and outgoing specimens, where they check the material and the paperwork, and they logged it within their old system called CRIS. And then that went on to curation for assessment for keeping, further identification, preparation for mounting, then through to mounting, and then on to curation. So you can see that digitization at an object level wasn't part of the accessioning procedure pre my work. So I started in April 2022, which is when the digitization project started. And the first step, which I did, was to research the current procedures and collaborate with our key stakeholders. So these were primarily the curation team, the CMU, and also our registrar and accreditation manager, so I could make sure that whatever I developed was aligned with those key Spectrum standards. This allowed me to establish the key criteria that the new procedures had to follow, and then from that I developed 5 possible workflows to pilot. They explored a kind of variety of options as to where digitization was going to sit, but we ultimately decided to pilot the most promising option and then review it after 2 months. This one actually did prove successful though. So after streamlining it over the next 2 years, this is now the collection operating procedure for new material entering the herbarium. So I'm going to talk you through the 3 fundamental elements. There is a QR code in the corner, but it doesn't work because my free trial lapsed like 2 days ago and I didn't pay for it. But basically all it is this on your phone so you can zoom in. I was worried it'd be too small, so you're not missing out on anything. But yeah. So first off is the traceability of an object based on consignment information. So in order to meet Spectrum standards for object entry, it's necessary for us to log all objects that come into our care and also be able to track who and where they came from. So previously to this work, all the consignment information was logged within that CMU specific database, CRIS, which I mentioned earlier, and that was independent to the object specific database. However, we now have an integrated collection management system, or ICMS, which holds all our different collections and CMU information in one single database. So this allows for us to have a lot more integration. Okay, it's meant to be highlighted, but it's not, but the bold parts are where to look at. So you can see that the specimen still enters the CMU as it did previously, where they check the specimen and the paperwork, and they create an individual consignment number for that transaction. And this is printed out onto labels, which are attached to the specimen bundles. This material then goes straight to the digitization team, where we will database the objects straight into our ICMS system and put this individual consignment ID into the record. So it links the object to the consignment and vice versa, and any legal implications or restrictions carry through onto the object. Secondly, in a similar vein to tracking a specimen's history pre-queue, we also need to be able to track a specimen throughout the procedure and know where it is on this accessioning journey. So there are 3 possible statuses for a specimen at queue herbarium. So when a specimen is databased after the CMU and it's unmounted, it's defined as having the legal status of object entry. This means that we are recording everything that comes into our herbarium and allows us the possibility to dispose of a specimen at this curation research stage in between databasing and imaging without it having to do a full deaccession. So we know if it's at object entry, it's within, it's being databased and it's with curation or mounting. The next stage is when a specimen becomes either accessioned, which means that it's taken into our legal ownership and added to our long-term collections, or acquired custodianship, which is a term that was coined by our accreditation manager and registrar, Ben Hill. And this basically means that the legal ownership of the genetic resource is retained within country, but we're committing to the long-term care of the specimen without owning it. And this comes after mounting. So we know if it's either accessioned or acquired custodianship, that it's part of our collection and it's been fully digitized. And then finally is integration with our current procedures. So we wanted to take advantage of the already standardized procedures that were established and effective. So we tried to integrate digitization into the pre-existing workflows as much as possible. So this is the pre-digitization workflow, and then this is where we kind of slot in. So we're kind of in individual pockets between teams, so we don't disrupt their normal workflow of material. This also means that we have access to the non-data-based pre-project workload, which is represented here. So this is kind of our backlog of material. As everything comes to us after mounting, we're able to image everything that we had databased after the CMU, but we're also able to digitize all this backlog as it comes through. So with the digitization project and the digitization of our collections, the curators know that anything that comes through, they're able to now lay away in the collections. So where are we now? I don't know why that's already there, but anyway. We have an established collection operating procedure to deal with the digitization and accessioning of new acquisition specimens. We work at a rate of, on average, about 600 specimens digitized per week. That's at MIDS 2 level transcription, straight into our ICMS system, with on average about 3 digitization officers. And we've also developed iterations for our more complex collections. So at Q, we also have the Millennium Seed Bank, the DNA and Tissue Bank, and also the living collections. And they all send vouchers to Q Herbarium. So with our new ICMS system, we're able to link our herbarium vouchers to those collections where necessary, as well as procedures to manage the digitization of outgoing and returning loans. And then our next steps, first is to develop and consolidate procedures for inter-institutional specimen exchange, where there's both physical specimens and digital data. So we've trialed this with a couple institutions, but we kind of want to trial this more. So if anybody has any material they're sending to Q, please do get in contact. And also look further into born digital data or digitally collected data in the field, and look into workflows with our new integrated collection management system and see where we can take that. So yeah, that's my talk. Thank you.
I think we have have some time for questions. If you have questions, please come up to the microphone. I say that not at a microphone, but do what I say, not what I do.
Hi, great talk, thank you. Elspeth Aston from the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. And yeah, really interested to know, because it's something we've been looking at, is how to apply the barcodes earlier. And I'm seeing you're attaching them to the labels with paper clips.
Yes.
And is that, did you have any nervousness about that, or?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, so yes, there was. But I think that the reason we do it is to link to that consignment ID. So otherwise, that consignment ID that's on the physical bundles gets separated from the specimens at the next step, so we could never kind of reunite them. And so I think that the pros kind of outweighed the risks of them being lost. We do have within our ICMS system, if there is a procedure of if you find a barcode that's loose in the herbarium, what to do with it. And we are able to print out another barcode. So because we database and collect that MIDS2 level transcription, so we've got the collector, collection number, and collection date. If there's something that doesn't have a barcode, we're able to print out a barcode straight from the ICMS system and then put that onto the specimen if something did get lost. I will say, though, we have been doing it for 2 years and nothing's gotten lost so far. We've just got amazing paper clips, but yeah, we haven't come across that so far. But we do have kind of a procedure in place in case that happens.
That's really interesting. Just a follow-up question, had you thought about attaching them to the label directly?
Yeah, we did kind of think about it, but often there's no room on the label, and our standard procedure is to attach them straight to the sheet. So I think we'd kind of have to do some more into that. And because the labels come from different institutions and stuff, there might not be enough space on the specimen. So yeah, so that is our standard, to just put them by paperclip.
Chuck Miller from Missouri Botanical Garden. I was wondering, where did the collector field books fit into this workflow?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The field books gathered by the collectors that are the basis of the label, where does that fit? I didn't see it in your workflow diagram.
Yeah, so do you mean as in like if it's collected in the field, all the information that's associated with the specimen for like Q research or?
Yeah.
Yes, so that's kind of what I mean about born digital data or data that's collected in the field. We're kind of looking into that a little bit more. So at the moment, we're doing some trials where we have a template for import. So in the field, people are able to collect their information and put it into this template, and then I'll import it, and then from that we can print the labels. But any like auxiliary data, I suppose, I don't think that's within our ICMS system. I don't think that's within the scope. So yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know if Ev's here, our developer for ICMS, he might have more answers for you than I do, but we can talk afterwards.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And next we've got Julia, if you want to come up. From the Western Australia.
Right. Hi everyone, I'm Julia Percy-Bauer from the Western Australian Herbarium. I'm presenting this on behalf of myself and Shelley James. Today I'll be talking about the accelerated digitisation program that we commenced earlier this year. A little bit of background about the Western Australian Herbarium. We're based in Perth, which is also our Index Herbariorum code, so I might refer to us as Perth during the talk. We're nearly 100 years old. We were established in 1929. We've had a few changes of location since then, and we moved to our current location in 2010. Our collection is completely data-based and comprises over 800,000 sheet collections, as well as collections of Carpologica, wet collections, and cryptogams. WA is a highly active environment for botanical collection and identification, particularly in relation to land management and mining exploration activities. We process into the collection approximately 10,000 new collections every year. The graph on the screen was prepared by Shelley with data extracted from the Australasian Virtual Herbarium, which is an online data aggregator for Australasian herbarium collections. As indicated by the grey bars, the state of Western Australia has more vouchered specimens than any other state. But WA is under-collected based on its land area, which is represented by the grey line. The number of collections per kilometre in Western Australia when compared to the other states is one of the lowest. One of our aims of the Accelerated Digitisation program is to increase the visual representation by sharing our specimen images and support a better understanding of the WA flora. So prior to 2024, very few of our specimens were imaged. Those that were predominantly type specimens associated with JSTOR's Global Plants Initiative and representatives of species that are of conservation significance in Western Australia. Additionally, our images weren't widely accessible, unlike our metadata, which is available via a number of online data aggregators. But before I get too far along, why do we want to image our collection at all? There's a lot of benefits to it, and some of them include reduced handling and risk of damage to our collection, the development of a digital reference collection for use in conjunction with our publicly accessible physical reference herbarium, which is frequently packed with environmental consultants completing species IDs. The ability to digitally share our collections with everyone, improved efficiencies in data cleaning and data curation of our specimens, refined loan and destructive sampling requests, reducing the risk to our collection through shipping and biosecurity inspections. But how are we going to achieve this? A big leap forward was the acquisition of a new imaging setup in late 2023. We were able to purchase a phase 150 megapixel CopyStan imaging system, and this equipment was a significant improvement on our existing imaging equipment and made the concept of a mass imaging process a lot more achievable. We then began reaching out to a number of herbaria with existing imaging programs to ask if they would share their knowledge and expertise in setting up a mass imaging program. We also explored publications and online resources with similar information. Following a rigorous documentation process, we had a draft manual for imaging our flat sheet collections in place. We then sought feedback from the team to review and test the manual before it was finalised. So we had our new imaging setup, new manual in place, but there were a few more things we needed to consider before the program could get underway. How do we make our images more accessible? How do we redact sensitive data? How do we accelerate image capture? What should we image first? A number of online storage options were considered in making our images more easily accessible. With the support of our department's IT services, we were able to set up an Azure Cloud blob. From there, we upload our JPEGs, and then they can be shared to anyone in the world through a standard formatted web address. We also retain our TIFF files in a department-managed SharePoint library. Sensitive label data is being redacted through bulk editing in Photoshop using a script that blurs the entire specimen label, and I've got an example on the screen there. We successfully secured funds to set up for a new position to set up and manage a volunteer imaging program with teams of volunteers now systematically imaging our flat sheet collections. Additionally, staff have commenced imaging of specimens with funding secured for new digitisation projects. So what have we learnt so far? What's working well and what might need a few adjustments? As the mass imaging program progresses, we're already seeing a reduction in staff workload when requests are received for specific taxa or specimens from clients. But more images, more space required. The large TIFF files that we generate are starting to prove somewhat of an issue in their current SharePoint environment, and discussions are underway into setting up a cold storage Azure blob for the TIFF files. The establishment of the volunteer imaging program has proven a great way to increase the herbarium's outreach. When gauging community interest prior to commencing the program, we received an overwhelming response. Our current setup involves 6 pairs of volunteers, each coming in for a half day every week. However, in the volunteer imaging program's current format, volunteers are only involved in a portion of the imaging process, which has resulted in an increased workload for the collections team in processing and quality assurance of the images. The mass imaging program has been a great way to engage our whole collections team, from testing and review of the guidelines and assisting with supervision activities when staff have been on leave. Many of the volunteers selected for the program are students or recent graduates. It's wonderful that we can support the provision of work experience opportunities, but it has resulted in a slightly higher turnover than some of our other volunteer programs, which does increase the staff workload for new starters. The increased visibility of our imaging efforts has assisted in securing additional funding for staff-led imaging projects, and we have been successful in commencing 2 this year. We've recently completed the imaging of our conservation-listed collections from the East Kimberley region in Western Australia, and we're in the process of completing a project funded by the Atlas of Living Australia, which includes imaging of our invasive and weedy species. So where are we headed next? We will revise our guidelines for imaging cryptogam and carpological collections to align with best practice standards we've implemented for imaging our sheep collections. Now that our images are accessible via an Azure Cloud blob with a standard formatted web address, we're keen to share these images online with data aggregators to further enhance the accessibility of our collections. I'd like to thank my colleagues at the Western Australian Herbarium, the global digitised programs that have supported us in this journey and developed best practice standards, and herbaria around the world who have shared their knowledge with us. A big thank you to my colleague Shelley James for her expertise and endless enthusiasm in all things collections and digitisation. Thank you.
All right, so we have time for a few questions. If you have one, please go up to the mic.
Hi, and thank you for your talk. I was curious about what the discussions about representing redacted information looked like and how to best represent that information.
Sure. So a legal requirement as part of our state government is to redact locality data. So with our metadata for the specimens, it's obfuscated, the coordinates are rounded, and an approximate location is delivered to outside sources. And then when we were looking at it with imaging, it just became a bit of a nightmare because all of the labels, the information is presented in slightly different locations on the sheet, and the easiest process was to redact the entire label, which also means we need to check for tags on the specimens or other annotations which might have information about the locality as well.
Does that affect the way requests for images are made, or does it affect like the usage of that digital material?
Not that we've encountered so far. So most of the requests that we receive are based on our specimen data, which at least provides a general location for where the species occurs. And if there was a strong justification, we can provide the original file that has the full label details, depending on what it's going to get used for.
Thank you.
And I just realized I forgot to thank our diamond sponsors. You can imagine all their wonderful logos on the screen. If you have any questions for them, please go out into the exhibition hall to inquire about their services. I've also been told that if you missed out on the chance to get a conference t-shirt, there is still another chance. You can go place an order anytime through, I think, now to the end of today to order a t-shirt. Delivery of said t-shirt is in the works. They're figuring out the logistics, so go get a cool t-shirt if you haven't already. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Yes, purchase the t-shirts through Oxford Abstracts. Yeah, all right. I'm sorry, I'm gonna mispronounce your name. Jelena?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kalina Yakamets, and I am the Workforce Development Manager for Tdwg. As a part of my role, I manage something called the Digitization Academy, along with my colleague, Austin Mast. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the professional development that we offer through the Digitization Academy, and some of our goals for creating a sustainable professional development resource for the digitization community. So Tdwg powers the Digitization Academy. Tdwg is funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation and is the national resource for advancing the digitization of biodiversity collections. It's organized into 6 domains of activity that support people who are working on digitizing information about biodiversity and doing research on data related to biodiversity. So the Digitization Academy comes out of the domain of Tdwg that is focused on digitization, workforce development, and participatory science. Tdwg has been offering professional development since its inception more than 10 years ago, often in the form of workshops or webinars. But the Digitization Academy since 2021 has been packaging those professional development offerings in a series of free and online courses. These courses have 2 formats. We cover emerging topics, new technologies and new methodologies in short online courses that are more like webinars. These courses are open to anyone in the world. They simply require registration, and we post videos online so that they can be accessed after. Some of the topics that we've covered in these short 2-hour courses include content creation for immersive media focused on biodiversity. So that's 360 videography and photography, photogrammetry, AI-enabled NERF 3D modeling, anything that creates content for virtual, augmented, or mixed reality. We also offer multi-day courses that are on more foundational topics and dive a little bit deeper. These involve smaller cohorts of participants, and they do have an application process. They are also free and online and available to anyone in the world. They require access to Zoom and Google Drive. Some of the topics that we cover in our more foundational courses are, we offer one on the introduction to biodiversity specimen digitization. So we cover topics like georeferencing and digital imaging and digitization workflows, project management. We also offer that introduction to biodiversity specimen digitization course in Spanish. We had our inaugural Spanish offering this past March. We do digital imaging for biodiversity collections and public participation in the digitization of biodiversity collections. So all of our courses, the short ones and the long ones, both feature these 3 elements, which are key to our approach to professional development and leveling people up in skills related to biodiversity data digitization. The first element is a systematic approach to delivering content in a way that is engaging and that hits on certain designed learning objectives. The second element, which we consider to be the most valuable, maybe and important, is the experience that participants bring to the courses. We take an asset approach to learning and recognize that everyone who attends our courses or participates has something to share and that we all learn from each other rather than delivering content and someone receiving that content. And we also always include an expert panel that identifies the leading edge of the possible. So these are people who are leaders in the field or who work on tools or emerging aspects of certain methodologies. So for example, in our introduction course, we have a panel of representatives from different collection management systems who talk about what's new and exciting with their systems, and they're on hand to answer questions from participants. So this, when we submitted the abstract for this talk, we had planned to have a workshop on the books to talk about our future strategy and some of the goals that we wanted to explore in developing a sustainable professional development resource for the digitization community. That workshop has yet to take place, but I can go through some of the goals that we think are important to consider as we provide a lasting and useful resource to the community. So the first goal is we want to try and understand who is engaged in the work of the digital description of biodiversity. Oftentimes, at least on the Spnhc side of things, in natural history collections, people who are doing the work of digitizing biodiversity data don't necessarily have backgrounds in biology or taxonomy or information science. They may have a fine arts background and expertise in digital imaging. So we're interested in finding out what kind of formal preparation the people who are engaged in this work have. We're also interested in understanding how we define the nature of the work. We use the term the digitization enterprise to describe the sort of vast and myriad activities that comprise the digitization of data about the natural world. Obviously, in a lot of cases, this includes biological specimens in a collection, but it can also include things like passive monitoring, AI-enabled sifting of information, camera traps, eDNA, and other facets of information. So if we can identify the people who are doing the work and the kind of work that is being done, we can begin to identify gaps in professional preparation for digitization, which is something that we're interested in doing so that we can obviously meet the needs of the community and their desire to level up their skills in this area. We're also especially interested in exploring how certification could be useful to people who are engaged in the digitization of biodiversity data or the institutions that they work for, or downstream data consumers who might be interested in some kind of formal certification of the work that goes into creating the data that they're using in research or in industry. We are also especially interested in, well, this says describe a framework for the continued engagement of the digitization community and professional development, but I think foundationally it means like building a community of alumni or people who are continually engaged in professional development, who are interested in conversations about how they can level up their skills, who are interested in connecting with colleagues, learning from one another, and providing feedback about what kind of support they could use in developing skills that would advance their work in digitization. We're also aware that a lot of the workforce of people who are doing the work of digitization are not necessarily professionals or paid professionals. So sometimes that can take the form of people who are engaged in participatory science activities or citizen science activities. But it can also include, if you're working in a natural history collection, you may have a volunteer who has an expertise in X-ray imaging because of a background in dentistry, who retired and now works in a museum or volunteers in a museum. And that those individuals might be pursuing, a project that is particularly, that satisfies a passion of theirs, and they bring expertise that maybe even other professionals in the museum don't have. And they might be very open to and benefit from professional development. So we're interested in asking questions about how we can support those individuals and the value of doing that. And then finally, I will just say that we love talking about professional development, and we're really interested in hearing feedback from the community. This might take the form of letting us know what you think about what areas we can offer training in, what kind of skills can be leveled up, and also any ideas you have about credentialing, the value or lack of value of credentialing for institutions or individuals, any companies or programs or organizations that are doing credentialing particularly well that would serve as a model My email address and that of my colleague Austin are here, and I think that QR code links to our website that has a contact form and also our email addresses, I think. And yeah, like I said, we do plan to have a workshop that is focused on advancing professional development in digitization. So if you want to carry on this conversation or have any interest in participating in that, please do reach out. And I want to acknowledge the National Science Foundation for their support of iDigBio and the Digitization Academy, and also Spnhc and Tdwg and our hosts here in Okinawa. Thank you.
Great. Let it sit in your brain a bit. All right, go for it. Yeah.
I don't really have a question, but I have participated in some of these and they are amazing. So if anybody has the chance, they're really fun, they're really informative, and you do a great job moderating it. So I recommend it.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it's very validating, and we do really appreciate the feedback from the community. So thank you.
Wonderful. So we should all sign up like immediately. All right, and so now we're on to our last speaker before our discussion, Kira.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Kira Sobers, and I am the head of the Digitization and Access Department at the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. I am going to start off by talking about digitization at the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, first with a brief history of digitization at our unit, and then a high-level overview of our workflows and some of the factors that affect collections prioritization and my role as digitization coordinator. I'll finish off by introducing DigiCoordNet, which is a new global network of digitization coordination practitioners. The Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, also known as SLA, is comprised of 21 library research centers and an institutional archive. We have locations all across the Washington, D.C. area, as well as in Maryland, Virginia, New York City, and in the Republic of Panama. Every Smithsonian Museum and Research Center has at least one library collection within it, and all the museums are supported centrally by the institutional archive. Our collections include over 2 million library volumes in subjects ranging from art to zoology, and more than 44,000 cubic feet of archival records relating to the history of the Smithsonian. Everything from the creation of exhibits to the personal papers of scientists in the Natural History Museum. We hold materials in a variety of formats, including research journals, trade literature, rare books, manuscripts, field notes, photographs, and audiovisual materials. However, in the not-so-distant past, SLA was two separate entities, the Smithsonian Institution Archives and the Smithsonian Institution Libraries. Each unit had their own digitization staff, workflows, and capabilities. And this is a timeline of some major events throughout the digitization history of the two separate units. A few key things I want to point out are the differences in when digitization started at each unit in 1997 for SIL, but not until 10 years later in 2007 for the archives. And the differences in capacity. The archives used flatbed scanners up until 2016 when a single copy stand was introduced, whereas by that point, the libraries had a copy stand and 2 book cradle imaging workstations in place. The integration of the 2 units became official in December 2020, and the digitization teams were officially integrated a year later. Now, we have 7.5 full-time staff. The staff and equipment are geographically distributed across 3 locations in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area, and the collections come from any one of the 22 locations I mentioned previously, including New York and Panama. The condition of the materials can vary widely, with the rare and archival items requiring the most input from conservators prior to digitization. Additionally, the differences in overall copyright status and item level description between our library and archival collections means that we have to take those aspects into consideration more heavily when coordinating digitization work. This is a high-level overview of all of the steps in the digitization workflow. As digitization coordinator and the head of the department, it is my job to process and prioritize incoming digitization reference requests and balance those needs with progress on unit priority projects. After selection, materials needing review get a once-over from our conservation team to determine if treatment is needed or if there are any restrictions on the type of the equipment we can use for digitization. After something is deemed ready to go, it is routed for imaging based on timeline and staff capacity. Sometimes that just means walking the materials over to the imaging lab or designated staging shelves, and sometimes it means packing the items for shipping via SLA staff couriers for imaging at a different physical location. Once the materials are digitized and post-processed, the imaging staff conducts a quality review of them and preps the material for return to its home location. Once the materials are online, they receive additional page-level metadata to make them more discoverable to researchers. We also have an ongoing data project to identify and correct materials imaged by a contractor many years ago that contain errors such as missing pages. I should also note that while my staff are primarily imaging technicians, my department is also responsible for handling the digitization of audiovisual requests, especially reference requests. Okay, so my role as the digitization coordinator not only involves making decisions on where to digitize things when, but it also requires collaboration with other departments within SLA. I need to communicate with our cataloging team to make sure that library materials have adequate records before imaging, as well as work with them on corrections or additions needed, such as when a book is missing pages. I meet with our preservation team weekly to discuss timelines and priorities for items being treated. And of course, I need to communicate with staff that work where the materials are physically located in order to have items sent to one of our imaging sites. All of this collaboration is happening just within SLA. However, it is also my job to report to internal leadership on progress and advocate for the needs of my department. I also collaborate with external data partners, such as other members of the Biodiversity Heritage Library, as well as represent SLA in external groups and communities that establish or improve processes related to digitization, such as the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative. One of the examples of advocating for our needs is that over the last several years, we've been working to upgrade and standardize our imaging equipment across the 3 imaging sites. As shown on the timeline earlier, the most recent piece of equipment was purchased in 2018, and the camera no longer met our needs. Additionally, I converted a conference room post-pandemic into a second imaging location in the National Museum of Natural History, which houses the bulk of SLA's library collections and one of our rare book libraries. In doing this, we now have greater versatility and overlap in what materials can be imaged where, which allows me to be more nimble in selecting an imaging location to fit desired timeline and equipment needs, as well as better balance staff workloads. I mentioned that part of my job is to prioritize our digitization projects. We know that a hard truth is that by definition, everything that SLA has digitized so far was deemed higher priority than the things that we haven't done yet. The pause in digitization caused by the global pandemic allowed us an opportunity to look at the outputs of our decades of imaging work and reflect on what factors had driven prioritization, how we might want to adjust those rubrics, and how resources might be reallocated to support those changes. One of the largest prioritization impacts is researcher requests. The nature of our collections and our user base means that we prioritize researcher requests for digitized materials over other projects. This sometimes means we have less control over what parts of the collection are being imaged, and striking that balance to ensure progress is still being made on unit priority projects can be difficult during seasons of high request volumes. Additionally, every 3 years, we are required to generate a unit digitization plan. This plan is a place for us to identify the collections we deem digitization priorities, as well as the challenges we envision in getting that work done. Shortly before the latest cycle of plans, we negotiated the ability to submit our plan a year after all the other Smithsonian units. Since SLA is a supporting unit to many Smithsonian museums, being able to review their plans before creating our own allows us to analyze and prioritize ways that we can collaborate and support initiatives at the museums, as well as allowing us to anticipate their needs, especially for materials that directly relate to their collections. Another major impact on prioritization is restricted funds and endowments. These funds are donated to SLA with specific conditions and intentions, such as the Atherton Seidel Endowment Fund. The restricted fund was originally dedicated to microfilming scientific literature and was later used to support digitization of these materials. We currently have 2 full-time staff funded by the endowment, but that means that they can only work on materials relating to scientific literature, which has had an obvious impact on the percentage of our materials digitized that relate to natural history compared to our arts and culture collections. We also have received a number of donations over the years with the specific intention of imaging certain subsets of our rare materials. Our participation in the Biodiversity Heritage Library has also had an impact on prioritization. In 2006, SIL became a founding member of BHL, which is the world's largest open access digital library for biodiversity literature and archives, and today SLA serves as the headquarters. The BHL Consortium provides collaborative prioritization guidance to partners, and partner library staff can request materials from each other, suggest titles for prioritization, and suggest collaborative initiatives to focus on specific subjects. Additionally, BHL regularly negotiates digitization permissions with publishers and rights holders in copyright material, providing greater open access to materials that would regularly be considered under copyright. SLA is a major contributor because we have more dedicated imaging staff than our other partners, thanks to the Seidel Endowment, but also through collaborative grants that we've received over the years. Combined, SLA has contributed over 11 million pages to the online portal. So what are some of the challenges? There are many challenges, but here are a few. Part of the problem with restricted funds for digitization is that it gives people the impression they can jump the queue if they donate money with the requirement certain materials are digitized. This creates a pay-to-play atmosphere that also makes it difficult to effectively prioritize our collections because we're always working on what the donors want. Additionally, it is increasingly common for grant proposals of many types to require materials to be digitized as part of the project, but the digitization coordinator is often left out of the grant writing and project planning process until funds have been received, and those funds rarely include enough money to complete digitization despite it being a required deliverable. This is something I'm actively working to change by ensuring leadership has a clear and accurate picture of the digitization queue and workflow so that they can stress the importance to their staff of communicating with me about a potential project as early as possible. Lastly, one of the biggest challenges to digitization coordination is making sure that our priorities balance equal representation across our digitized collections. We already know that our digitized materials skew heavily toward the natural sciences, but that doesn't mean that we can't find ways to bring out diversity within our collections by prioritizing materials that feature women or minorities in natural history. However, I don't have to face these challenges alone. I am part of a group of people around the world working to create a network of digitization coordinators, or DigiCoordNet, in order to create a global community of practice. The Digitization Coordinator Network is a community of peers from natural history institutions and affiliations aiming to jointly develop affordable, adaptable, shared approaches and resources for digitization coordination and to foster collaboration locally and globally. These efforts highlight the transformational value of coordinating digitization within and across institutions, improving efficiency, value, and innovation in the digitization of collections. DigiCoordinate came about because Sylvia Orley, the newly appointed digitization coordinator at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, proposed a talk for her highlighting her new role for BioDigicon at 2022. The position was designed to provide leadership, connections, and knowledge, connect staff to the right resources, assess the digitization needs of the collections as a whole, assess digitization costs versus benefits, advocate for fundraising, and provide a digitization point of contact for the museum. The talk ended up being a session featuring SLA, London's Natural History Museum, Museum for Naturkunde Berlin, and Natural History Museum of Utah, 4 institutions where this new structured cross-disciplinary approach to digitization has allowed for better awareness and resourcing for their digitization needs. The response and enthusiasm at BioDigicon prompted iDigBio to put together a 3-day workshop at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. Once together in person, it was evident that regardless of size, many institutions are facing similar issues surrounding these 8 topics in response to digitization coordination efforts, and that there was a need for a global community of practice to share resources and tools. Cultural changes within institutions and between institutions need improvement to help provide the community holistic views of what has been accomplished to date and plans for future digitization efforts. We all know there are many steps that go into the digitization process. It takes a lot of people and coordination to make it happen successfully, and often efforts can be siloed between these different steps, different departments, etc. Thus, DigiCoordinate was officially born. When thinking about our goals for this group, we wanted to create a place that would support the role of a digitization coordinator and their instrumental work of improving the efficiency and throughout of improving the efficiency and throughout of digitization within larger institutions by providing leadership, establishing unified goals, sharing knowledge, and hopefully to be an advocate for biological collections as a whole. But we also understand that not everyone has a need or resources to have one person dedicated to a position like this, and wanted to create a space that would support digitization coordination as a whole, no matter your collection size, workflows, resources, knowledge, or priorities for digitization of collections. Our goals for DigiCoordinate are to emphasize the importance of digitization coordination and connect coordinators with each other and useful resources. We all need the same things to do our job, but we don't all have to start from scratch. So far, we've published a report about the workshop on Rio, set up a Slack channel, and we hold virtual monthly meetings with participants. Our official launch of DigiCoordinate is happening right now, this very second, at this conference. We are also in the final stages of editing a 10 simple rules style paper on digitization coordination. Our next steps are the development of focus groups around the areas of policy, publications, and outreach, gathering resources, and opening the group up to new members, such as yourselves. You can find us on the DigiCoordinate website, which is still a work in progress, so check back regularly to see new content we have added. The best way to communicate with members of DigiCoordinate with questions, resource offers, or anything else is through our Slack channel. And we are using Zenodo as a hub for all of our published resources. We have a community there called DigiCoordinate where you can request to contribute your materials if you have something that you think would benefit the group. Speaking of resources, we are looking for your coordination resources and input to make this community grow and thrive. If you have materials related to any of these topics that you'd like to share with others in the group, please reach out to us on Slack and we can give you instructions on how to help contribute. We're looking for materials related not just to ongoing coordination of digitization at institutions, but we are interested in resources you have created or used for finite digitization projects as well. Lastly, the whole purpose of this community is to be useful to digitization coordinators and like-minded practitioners. Is there something you would like to see or that would be really useful to your job or role that wasn't listed on the previous slide? Let us know. All 4 of the moderators of this session are members of DigiCoordinate, and we are happy to speak to you.
So we have a lot of time for questions and discussions. Please come up to the microphone, ask Kira some questions, or if you have questions about the DigiCoordinate group and what you would like to see, yeah, feel free. We're not that scary, I promise. Okay, I also should, while we're waiting and you're thinking about your many questions for our wonderful speakers, if the members of the DigiCoordinate want to raise their hands and you have questions for us, feel free to find us for the rest of this week, which is really just tomorrow, I realized. So raise your hand if you're currently an active member. Yay. All right, so come find us if you have questions, things you'd like to contribute, or am struggling to access the Slack channel. But I think this is our last talk for now, but please stay and have discussions. Am I missing anything, my fellow co-moderators?
I was going to additionally say too, at the iDig Bio booth, I could additionally put a sign-up sheet if anybody right now knows that this is something that they want to be a part of. I think the biggest challenge I think that we're having right now is that we know that this is something that people are saying that they want, people are saying that they have resources, but then we aren't getting them. So it's a lot of work to try to contact everybody and say, hey, what coordination resources do you have? And you know, where we all have full-time jobs, and this is something that we really care about. But if there's anything, you know, no matter how big or small that you can add, you know, we can help share, you know, the Zenodo information, but, you know, maybe a sign-up sheet at the iDig Bio booth would be the easiest way right now. Or like Kira said, you can contact us later if you change your mind. But yeah, anything that you have to share would be helpful.
Just wanted to add to that, that there's a quick question from Chris in the chat. It says, hi, I recently heard of the Smithsonian Digitization Program Office. Kira, could you please elaborate on how your team is related to that effort?
Sure. So the Smithsonian Digitization Program Office sits within the Office of the Chief Information Officer, which is part of our IT group department. And they are actually the ones that requested all the units submit a unit digitization plan. Part of the reason for that unit digitization plan is that it gets submitted to DPO, the Digitization Program Office. They review it, but one of the sections on there is specifically asking how they can help with digitization at the individual units and museums. They do a lot with mass digitization of images and a lot of 3D work that's been coming out of it lately. We personally at the libraries and archives have not engaged with them on any of the projects just because our material isn't great for any sort of mass digi workflow. Archival things are not sorted by size or anything that would be helpful for a mass workload, but they have been fantastic for a number of the units around the Smithsonian.
All right, so I think that is all, unless I'm forgetting something.
No, I don't think that you're forgetting anything, but just for additional context, some of the resources that are up on our Zenodo resource space include job descriptions and types of skills that are required for someone to serve in a digitization coordinator type position. So as additional resources are needed, or if there are things that you're looking for from the community, whether it be DigiCoordNet or the Digitization Academy or other resource opportunities that can help contribute to upskilling existing people if you don't have a FTE dedicated to this thing. Too often, digitization coordinators are the people that are wearing way too many hats and are stretched too thin. And so this is an opportunity that we have been able to do to start to come together and say, there are too many things happening that are of too great importance and significance at our institution for us to not have more dedicated support and resources and a real person that is not just like their 14th hat to do this sort of thing. So if you're one of those people or you have one of those people at your institution, talk to us, and we're going to start to coordinate resources so that we can also start an advocacy group to petition museum directors and administrators and university leadership to start to talk about how we as a community recognize the importance of roles of people like digitization coordinators and biodiversity information managers to supplement collections management.
And following the workshop, Gary is now the digitization coordinator at the Yale Peabody Museum. John Woodward is now the digitization coordinator at Harvard MCZ, and is that right? And then recently, I think Gary was reached out directly from the Carnegie, also interested in in that digitization coordination role and that job description. So again, we're hoping that it's time out of Gary's day which everybody's happy to help everyone, right? But it's time out of Gary's day to sit down and talk to the Carnegie and plan out this position. And we're hoping all those resources, we can have somewhere online that people can be pointed to that can provide some of those resources. And also just, how to go about planning for something like that. Because as you can imagine, as I know everybody here is familiar with, that can be tough. Everybody, often departments are siloed. People are used to doing their own thing. And, having that change of culture can be difficult. So just having, someone, but then also just kind of like, what were the order of operations that you took to, build that community together, to talk about, to unite similar visions, so people didn't feel like they didn't have a say in cultural changes at their institution, but everybody can kind of meet in a place where, goals can be discussed and everybody feels like they're a part of what's being done. And it's not something, it's not the siloed groups that are doing anything wrong. It's just that we're trying to holistically work together in our efforts to not duplicate things, because sometimes people don't even know that you have a camera next door, that you're trying to, buy a new camera and you could just be sharing it with someone next door. So those things that seem really simple, everybody here knows aren't always that easy. So that's kind of what that's the plan. Yeah, that's the hope. Yeah.
Our job, we as Digi coordinators are here to make your jobs as scientists easier, not harder, even though it doesn't always feel that way. So yeah, we'd love to have you guys join and let us know what you want and what you need and how we can help, you guys start advocating for similar-ish positions from student roles to full-time staff roles, because it's helpful, I'd like to think. I create less problems for people. I'd assume they would tell me otherwise. So yeah, thank you guys for coming.